You have to expect, anticipate, and be prepared for the unexpected. What do we do as a country, and what do you do as an individual if America is not at the top of the mountain anymore? Economists are predicting that by 2033, we live in such an interesting time. And I get it. I get that there's people out there who want things to be simple. And there's always gonna be people who reminisce about the old days. Like, you still hear people now talk about returning the world to a pre-Russian invasion world. I don't know if you've heard that yet, but there are people out there who talk about, if we just do this or we just do that, everything will revert back to February 24th, 2022, before Russia invaded Ukraine. If there's anything that we should be accepting and leaning into right now, it's that the world is evolving at an incredible pace. Mm-hmm. You and I are of the same generation, right? We served at CIA at the same time, right? We remember the CD. We remember the tape deck. We remember the VCR. I remember when DVR first came out, when there was no recording a television show. And now you're streaming television shows live on multiple different platforms. We should be embracing the fact that the world is changing at a massive pace. But also, we have to accept that if you're going to embrace change, not all change is change that you like. So that's why I feel like it's important to talk about change, to embrace change, and to be open about the fact that there's some change that we like, there's some change that we don't like. But we should really understand the pros and cons of both, right? That's something that's really important to me, and it's something that I wish more people would embrace, because at CIA, change was one of those things that they drilled into us all the time. You have to expect, anticipate, and be prepared for the unexpected. You have to be ready for change.
Yeah, adapt and overcome, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
When you're talking about this change, what specifically is in your head right now?
So I would say at the biggest level, we have to be asking ourselves the question, what would a world look like where the United States is not the largest superpower? We have to be asking ourselves. If you're not asking yourself that question, you're just staring at a wall. You're blinding yourself. Mm-hmm. We have to be asking ourselves a question. What do we do as a country, and what do you do as an individual if America is not at the top of the mountain anymore? Economists are predicting that by 2033, China will be the largest superpower in the world. The largest military and the largest economy.
Do you agree with that?
If you're looking at empirical evidence, absolutely. If nothing changes between now and 2033, they might even get there faster. So we have to accept the fact that the world is changing. Now, there's still a long time. That's 10 years. That's a decade between now and 2033. Mm-hmm. Can we effect changes now that prevent that from happening? I think we can. They'd have to be pretty radical changes, but I think we can do it. But if we just turn a blind eye and we say it's never going to happen, if we just ignore it, if we put our faith in politicians to do it for us, I'm not so sure it's going to happen in that case, right? So, but that's the biggest question I ask myself every day is, what does my life look like as a 50-year-old man if America is not the largest superpower? What does my children's college experience look like if the United States is not the number one superpower in the world? If my children go into military service, what does that look like if we're the second largest military? Those are questions no generation. My parents didn't have to ask themselves that question. It wasn't until I get back to my grandparents, and that was the generation, yours and our grandparents were the ones that actually saw the rise of the United States. There was a whole generation between them and us that never even had doubts, never had to wonder if the U.S. would be the biggest. Yeah. Right? And now you and I have to be ready to let our children graduate into a world where potentially they'll be number two.
Do you think there's a possibility that they are already more advanced?
No. I think there's always a probability. So CIA teaches us to look at all outcomes as probabilities, right? Probabilities and possibilities. So probability is valuable because it's numerical, it's calculatable, it's empirical. So there might be a 2% probability of something happening, which makes it very unlikely, but it's still a possibility. versus a 98% probability. A 98% probability makes something very possible, very likely, but still possibly not true, right? So you got this large spectrum that you have to consider when you look at probabilities. So is the United States, or is China more advanced than the United States right now? Possibly, but not likely.
Why do you say that? Why do you say not likely?
Because you have to understand that China, starting in like 2001, 2002, early 2000s, they took a very different direction than the United States, right? When 9/11 happened, all of our resources went into terrorism, combating terrorism. Chinese didn't participate in that war, right? So what they did is they used that time frame to start advancing, to start building the infrastructure that we had spent the previous 20 to 30 years building. Mm-hmm. China doesn't have wired telephone lines like we have in the United States. Any American knows what it's like to drive down any road in the United States and see telephone lines. We remember, you and I remember what it was like when you could only talk on telephone lines. The United States invented cellular signals, we invented cell phones, we invented cell towers. When the Chinese actually grew up to the place where they could become a first world country, they basically skipped past telephone lines and graduated directly into cellular era. So when our cell network goes down, we'll fall right back to telephone lines. When their cell network goes down, there is no backup.
Okay.
Right? People are going next door neighbor to next door neighbor. It's old school telephone. Tell the person in front of you to tell the person in front of them how things work.
Gotcha.
Right? So they have grown up on our advancement. That's where we are now. That's why you still see issues with intellectual property and you still see issues with corporate espionage and economic espionage. They grow by stealing, reverse engineering, and then programming from there. Maybe they'll make an incremental improvement on what they steal, but for the most part, they're just learning how what they steal even works. And it's not just us they do it to. They steal from Europe, they steal from Russia, they'll steal from everybody to get the whatever is the most advanced thing on the market. Whereas here in the United States, we tend to develop, innovate, create our own economic advantage, right? All the semiconductors and super chips that we're all worried about because they're built in Taiwan, they're all designed here. They're just built there because we don't have a manufacturing base anymore. So that's why I'm not worried that China is already more sophisticated. They beat us to the punch in some things. They've got hypersonic missiles. We're just developing them, right? They've got different technology on aircraft that they've been able to steal from Europe and the Middle East that we're still developing, right? But then you look at other things, their aircraft carriers don't compare to our aircraft carriers. Their operational organizational execution of military conflict, their approach to covert influence, or what we would call propaganda, is very, very much behind.
Really? You think they're behind?
They're behind in how they execute it because they have a state-run system. So they can basically blast fake news and withhold real news. That's rudimentary versus what we have in the United States, where free news, truthful news is out there and fake news is out there.